Hello, welcome to episode 3 of Opera Insight 2025. I'm your presenter, Dr. Don Feinberg, and today we will look at a tale where a not very nice fellow has been wronged and who is taken over by the irrational, obsessive need for revenge. It leads to terrible consequences. You know, if you thought I might have been describing the opera Moby Dick, based on Melville's novel, and Captain Ahab's quest for vengeance, you might have been right. But you would definitely be right if you thought this episode focused on our third opera of the season, Rigoletto, the story of the bitter, perhaps simple-minded hunchback jester whose murderous revenge plot results in his tragic undoing. Revenge is such a powerful narrative device. Dramaturgically speaking, it's what makes the plot so juicy. And not just in opera. It drives the plot of many of Shakespeare's plays, like Hamlet, where the ghost of his father urges him to avenge his foul murder. And in contemporary classics like The Godfather, revenge is laced throughout the 3 movies of the trilogy. It is as current as the tit-for-tat wars in the Middle East and as popular as the Academy Award-winning Best Picture Unforgiven. In our opera, Rigoletto, each character in this revenge gone wrong narrative sings their emotions to the dramatic score of Giuseppe Verdi. As the director Julian Chavez observes, these characters are note by note created by the music. It's an especially powerful experience for us in the audience. This opera does not come around as often as Bohème or Figaro, but when it does, I'd encourage you not to miss it. Now, for a little psychological digression. Ever wonder why in real life revenge that is supposed to taste so sweet has such a bitter aftertaste? In the words of Francis Bacon, a man that studieth revenge keeps his own wounds green, meaning festering, which otherwise would heal and do well. Many psychological studies have validated this point. Revenge does not make the revenger feel better, and often worse. However, there's one exception, and today we'll find out what it is and why, unlike most experiences of revenge, this one leaves us satisfied. In this opera, unlike reality, revenge sets the world right. This is made even more powerful with complex moral situations, as in Rigoletto. As we'll see shortly, he pays a terrible price for his desired revenge. We can still feel bad for a character that we neither admire nor like, but it makes sense of a world with its complex motives and violent actions. But in this case, it succeeds because this revenge gone awry makes more sense than most. It's why we feel for a Rigoletto, but not for Captain Ahab. So, with that said, let's jump into the opera and see how this tale of a revenge gone awry plays out. The opera opens in the public rooms of the lavish abode of the Duke of Mantua. We quickly learn the Duke is a cad of the highest order. He's a serial seducer of women, caring little for the havoc he wreaks on their hearts, their reputations, or their marriages. And he has his eye on an unknown girl that he has seen at church, as mysterious as she is beautiful. He targets her as his new conquest. Constancy, he sings in his aria, is a tyrant of the heart. I detest it like the plague. Rigoletto, in the meantime, torments Count Ceprano, whose wife the Duke intends to bed. The Count is but the latest target for the deformed jester's humiliating wit. In a reflexive way, he obeys the Duke like a trained attack dog that even the Duke has to muzzle occasionally. Rigoletto himself has his own qualms, but we don't see them until later. Ceprano cannot risk attacking the Duke himself, so he settles for the next best thing. He rallies the other courtiers for, you guessed it, revenge on the jester with the toxic tongue. They believe Rigoletto has a mistress, and through her, they intend to get payback on him that very night. Things heat up when Count Monterone enters. We learn that he again rails at the Duke. He wants the Duke to be punished for ruining his daughter. He calls for the Duke's damnation, and after Rigoletto insults him further, Monterone calls him a serpent for laughing at a father's grief, singing "Mia maledetto," my curse is upon you. The Duke has him arrested, and the chorus sings at the angry, grief-stricken father as he's led away. They sing, "You provoked it, a fatal mistake on your part." Clearly, the court ignores his ranting curses. And just as clearly, Rigoletto is undone by the invective and the maledizione. He fears he deserves it, especially because it was uttered by a man risking imprisonment or even death by damning the Duke who ruined his daughter. In this way, the first scene introduces powerful and poignant psychological aspects of the narrative. It's both musically and dramaturgically brilliant. Immediately, we meet the main players. The scene launches the action. It concludes with Count Monterone's arrest for threatening the Duke and exemplifies the generally accepted idea that actions have consequences. In a concrete way, if you attack your sovereign, you forfeit your freedom, if not your life. And for us, it introduces a psychological principle called the just world hypothesis. Simply, things happen to people for a reason. As is often said, what goes around comes around. This simplification of social reality helps us to make sense of the world, so often rife with injustice and random bad luck. And even more unfairly, it leads to the inclination to blame the victim for their own abuse. This is what the chorus tells Monterone as he's led off. However, before he goes, he reminds us that he is not the only one who will be undone by the boomerang of their actions. The effect is so great because the old man's suffering comes as a result of his desire to avenge his daughter, who suffered because of the Duke's taking advantage of her. Although Rigoletto plays his part in tormenting the old man, at least some part of him knows how terrible it is for a man to devote himself to the protection of his daughter and to fail at it. The implication is clear. The curse is the front end of the just world hypothesis. Ultimately, it will come back to haunt Rigoletto. We already heard from the courtiers that they too are plotting a vendetta against Rigoletto for his demeaning taunts, and yet another example of vendetta or payback. Now, returning to the opera's narrative, in the next scene, Rigoletto meets an assassin, Sparafucile. We are a bit surprised when Rigoletto asks about the price for killing a nobleman. After the assassin departs, Rigoletto sings a psychologically and musically brilliant aria. He likens himself to an assassin who uses his tongue instead of a blade. The mood shifts. Rigoletto remembers the curse for his actions. But then he explains to himself, although he's a vile scoundrel, he himself has been mercilessly teased at court, and he just reacts with his acerbic taunts. But somehow he knows it's his own innate nature that made him into the vile scoundrel that he is. And then we learn why he was asking about assassinating a noble. It is the curse. Rigoletto rationalizes, the Duke orders me to amuse him by turning my rapier tongue on the courtiers. Surely he relishes it. And then the courtiers ridicule him, Rigoletto. But still, he does it at the Duke's behest. And he asks, why should he be the object of the curse? And then he dismisses it as folly. Gilda enters the scene and declares her joy upon the return of her loving father. We see another side of Rigoletto. He's a widower. His daughter is his joy. He calls her his whole world. He insists she never go out except to church, and he fears she would be abducted and dishonored for humiliating payback. You know, in Zen Buddhism, there's a koan, well, that is to say, a paradoxical story to deepen one's understanding. And it goes like this: when you walk a mile east, you walk a mile west. While I'm no expert on the deeper meaning of a koan, the overt meaning that blindly moving in a single direction often has blowback in the exact opposite direction. As a psychiatrist, I see this with my couples frequently. One person wants to get their point across so vehemently they raise their voice louder and louder to get their partner to agree and see the error of their ways. And what happens? The urgency to communicate by shouting only makes their partner turn a deaf ear and ignore the shouting partner even more. In this case, Rigoletto's strict effort to protect his daughter backfires. Gilda, an adolescent, recently returned from a convent school. She's been sheltered from men, and she's vulnerable in a dangerous world. As we'll soon see, in her innocence, she confuses the Duke's lust with her being loved, so much so she would make the ultimate sacrifice to save him. Enter Giovanna, Gilda's duenna, that is, her governess companion. Rigoletto urges her to fulfill her duty and protect Gilda. Isolate her, let no one in. And who should arrive and surreptitiously sneak into the garden? It's the Duke, disguised as a commoner, a veritable wolf in sheep's clothing. We realize that the target of his seduction and the so-called mistress of Rigoletto from the first scene are one and the same. It's Gilda, Rigoletto's daughter. The Duke bribes Giovanna to remain quiet, and he hides in the shadows. The plot, as they say, thickens. When Rigoletto departs and the Duke overhears Gilda confess to Giovanna that she has an attraction for the handsome young man that follows them from church, she says because he is just too beautiful and he inspires love. The Duke figures that this is his cue. He emerges from the shadows and professes his love. Giovanni disappears, as any bribed traitor would, and the Duke tells Gilda that her fate is bound to him. She is falling for him. And here there's an echo, the role of fate in our lives as determining our destiny. Well, in any case, they are interrupted by the approaching kidnappers. The Duke tells her that he is but a poor student, Walter Malde. They pledge their love that will, quote, last forever. The Duke departs with Giovanna. Rigoletto returns and runs into the kidnapping courtiers. Their plan is operatically convoluted, but bear with me. They tell Rigoletto that they are there to kidnap Ceprano's wife. They will include Rigoletto, and they will mask him as they are masked. They instruct him to hold the ladder. A courtier explains, the so-called mask will make Rigoletto blind and deaf. It seems far-fetched, but it is an opera. Well, maybe not so far-fetched from a psychological point of view. When the courtiers include him in their plot, he readily agrees because he longs for their acceptance instead of their ridicule. It indeed makes him blind and deaf to their scheming. It accounts for the murderous rage and desire for revenge in him, because he not only suffers the kidnapping of his daughter, he also experiences unbearable humiliation and shame because his naivete allowed him to be drawn into their scheme. So, there he is, holding the ladder. The courtiers carry off Gilda. She drops her scarf. She screams for help. Her pleas fall on deaf ears. When Rigoletto tires of waiting, he takes off his mask. He finds the scarf and realizes it's Gilda who has been taken. Again, he wonders, was this the inevitable result of the maledizione, the curse? We are left wondering also, because this is the end of Act 1. After intermission, we are back in the ducal palace. Immediately, the plot gets more complicated and familiar. Why? Last night, the Duke returned to Rigoletto's home to find Gilda has been kidnapped. He proclaims his genuine love for Gilda, almost convincing him to lead a virtuous life. But almost isn't good enough, because this isn't horseshoes. Instead, worry for her. His concern turns to, you guessed it, vengeance. Who dares do this? He exclaims. And he adds, "Ma ne avrò vendetta, I will have vengeance." The courtiers show up with the kidnapped Gilda. The Duke takes her into his room and completes the seduction. Rigoletto enters and is ridiculed until the courtiers discover that it's his daughter and not a mistress that they have taken to the Duke. Rigoletto swears vengeance if he has debauched her. Gilda appears and confesses that the Duke has in fact seduced her, but she loves him, and Rigoletto should give up his vendetta. Instead, he obsesses about it, and their duet ends the act. The next act begins at the inn run by the assassin, Sparafucile. There, we find him with Gilda and Rigoletto, still having the same conversation. "I will avenge you," he says. "But I love him," she retorts. I would be remiss if I did not mention that at this point in the opera, the Duke sings the aria La Donne Mobile, Women Are Fickle. This aria has been chosen by every tenor for every talent show until recently replaced by the success of Nessun Dorma in America's Got Talent. Even if you know very little about opera, I guarantee you have heard this aria in any collection of opera's greatest arias. Just go to YouTube and you can experience every modern tenor's version of the aria. Rigoletto has arranged for Gilda to secretly observe the unfaithful Duke pitch woo to Sparafucile's sister. Gilda realizes the love of her life is a two-timer. She's heartbroken. Rigoletto tells her to don men's clothing, take money and the horse, and go to Verona where they'll meet up the very next day. She begs him to come with her, and this is the moment that seals his fate, when sensible escape is replaced by senseless vendetta. He refuses and sends her home. Gilda returns explaining to herself and us that my reason has left me and love draws me back. Apparently, dysfunctional motivation runs in the family. She overhears the plot to kill the Duke. The assassin and his sister argue because she has given an impassioned plea to her brother to spare the Duke. They come up with a compromise plan. They will kill a stranger should one show up and then collect the money from Rigoletto. Gilda, dressed as a man, decides to become that stranger and sacrifice her life to save her unfaithful beloved. She is stabbed and her body is put in a sack. Psychologically speaking, we understand why the Duke, who is by any measure a scoundrel, is such a popular character. Women compete for him. Men consciously or unconsciously want to be him. And my proof? At the end of the opera, he gets off scot-free, and it confuses no one. Nobody asks, what about that scoundrel, the Duke? No, we are too much engrossed in Rigoletto's tragedy. When he shows back up, he assumes the Duke is assassinated, but the fatally wounded Gilda is not quite dead, just in the sack about to be dumped in the river. The Duke is heard in the distance, singing his famous aria. Rigoletto opens the sack and realizes he has been hoisted by his own petard. Gilda has been struck by the thunderbolt of his righteous vengeance. What is his explanation for how this could happen. It comes full circle as the opera concludes with Gilda's dying and the despairing Rigoletto uttering the recognition that he brought it on himself. It's because of the curse, the maledizione. This is crucial for the revenge story to be satisfying that I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. It is the key ingredient to make revenge satisfying. This is it. When the person understands that they deserve to be the victim of vengeance, then the anger and grief that generates the revenge can be satisfied. An unrepentant object of vengeance only makes the bitterness grow. It's like trying to fix a hole in your pants by cutting it out. But not here. In Rigoletto, the circle is complete. We see a satisfying just world hypothesis enacted right before our eyes. The vendetta completed. The tragedy undeniable. The music unforgettable. For Rigoletto, his fate is sealed. For each of us, we can choose not to let our emotions obscure our better judgment. While we cannot predict what unfairness the world might throw at us, we can decide how we choose to react. We can determine the person who we want to be in the world. In episode 4, we encounter an opera where truly factors beyond control take hold. Perhaps a ghost story, or perhaps a psychotic break in Benjamin Britten's The Turn of the Screw. See you next time.